I never thought I'd become that kind of person. You know, the kind of guy who sits in a quiet house late at night, sipping a half-empty glass of whiskey and replaying the past like an old, scratched record. But here I am, a 34-year-old man who thought his life was settled, thought he had a solid marriage, thought he was a decent husband. Turns out I was wrong about a lot of things. It started out as a good marriage. I met Emily when I was 26. She was 24, fresh out of college and working at her first real job as a paralegal. At the time, I was working in IT, making good money and enjoying the freedom. Em was beautiful, smart, and had such energy that she just drew me in. We quickly found a common language. 2 years later, we were married. 8 years later, I would tell you that we were still going strong together, or at least I wanted to believe so. Life was good for a while. We both had careers, bought a house in the suburbs, went on vacations when we could. We talked about having kids someday, but took our time. Looking back, I can't pinpoint the exact moment when things started to crack. Maybe it was when we started living not as a couple, but as roommates. Maybe it happened when we became so comfortable that we stopped trying. Or maybe it happened when my father got sick. My dad has always been a pillar of support for me. He raised me and my younger sister Allie alone after my mom died when I was a teenager. He worked tirelessly to make sure there was food on the table, and we had everything we needed. He was the kind of person who never complained no matter how hard things got for him. So when his health began to decline earlier this year, I knew I had to help him. At first it was little things. He would forget to take his medication or have trouble getting around the house. Then the hospital visits started. They called it congestive heart failure. The doctors said he could no longer live alone. A nursing home wasn't an option. I couldn't afford nice homes, and I wasn't about to send him to one of those places the horror stories on the news tell you about. So I decided to move him into our house. I talked to Em about it, and she immediately agreed. "He's family," she said. "We'll make it work." Hearing her words made me feel like I'd hit the jackpot with her again. I thought it would be hard, sure, but I believed we'd get through this together. I was wrong. Things were good for the first couple weeks. Dad settled into the guest room. Em helped him here and there, picking up medications, cooking meals, and the like. But soon stress began to creep in. Dad's needs were constant. He needed help going to the bathroom, someone to monitor his nutrition. He had regular doctor's appointments. I would come home from work already tired and immediately get involved in the care work. Meanwhile, Em started spending more time out of the house. At first, I didn't pay attention to it. She would say she needed to clear her head or run an errand. Then it was yoga classes. Then it was dinners out with friends. I figured she was just trying to handle the situation in her own way. After all, I wasn't a ray of sunshine at that point either. But then the errands started to drag on. Yoga classes started running late. And dinners with friends? They became routine, always conveniently scheduled for evenings when Dad was having a rough time. One night, when she came home a few hours later than promised, I finally brought it up. I didn't accuse her of anything. I didn't even have suspicions at that point. I just wanted to know what was going on. "You've been going around a lot lately," I said. "Is everything okay?" She sighed, as if the weight of the world had been placed on her shoulders. "I'm just overwhelmed, you know? This whole thing with your dad. It's really weighing on me. I just need some space to breathe." Her answer made sense, and I felt like a jerk for asking. Of course she needed space. I did too. Taking care of my dad was taking all my energy, and I wasn't a good husband because of it. But what could I do? He needed me. That's what I kept telling myself. A couple weeks later, I got a call from my sister Allie. She lives in the same town and comes over pretty regularly, mostly to help with Dad or just to check on me. This time, however, she didn't seem like her old self. "Hi," she said. "Can we talk?" "Sure. How are you doing?" A long pause followed. "I don't know how to tell you this, but I saw him at the Clover last night." The Clover is a local bar, a place where people go to relax after work. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. Okay. She wasn't alone. That stopped me. "What do you mean?" "She was with some guy. They looked pretty cozy, Nate." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Are you sure it was her?" "Yes," Allie said firmly. "I didn't want to say anything, but I figured you should know." My thoughts raced. I wanted to believe there was some explanation, something innocent. But deep down, Some part of me already knew. I didn't say anything to him that night. I just watched her. Every word she said, every move she made. I analyzed them like a goddamn detective. And the more I watched, the more I saw. The distance, the excuses, the way she avoided eye contact. I told myself I'd meet her when I was ready, but I didn't really want to know. Not yet. Because once I knew, there would be no turning back. Looking back, I wish I'd done things differently. Maybe if I had paid attention sooner, I could have stopped it. Or maybe it wouldn't have made a difference. Either way, the cracks were there. I just didn't notice they were there. And when I did, it was too late. Life had become a juggling act that I hadn't signed up for but couldn't refuse. Between my father's health issues, work, and trying to keep my marriage from falling apart, I felt like I was working myself to exhaustion every day. I would get up early, help my dad with his morning chores, rush to work, spend 8 or 9 hours there dealing with the usual chaos, and then come home to the same thing. It was unbearable, but I kept telling myself I could handle it. I kept thinking, it's only temporary. That's what I told myself whenever stress started to creep in. Dad would stabilize, things would settle down, and Em and I would get back to normal. I clung to that thought like a lifeline. But deep down, I think I knew it wasn't going to be that easy. It wasn't like Em and I were fighting all the time. Honestly, it would have been better if we were fighting. At least it would have meant we were talking. Instead, we just distanced ourselves from each other. She became quieter, more reserved. I'd come home and find her sitting on the couch, leafing through her phone and barely raising her eyes when I walked in. "Hi," I said, trying to sound cheerful even though I was dead tired. "Hi," she replied without much enthusiasm. That was the end of our conversation. If she asked how my day was, it seemed like she was just recounting events. And I was no better off. I didn't have the energy to talk about work or talk about how hard it was to keep up with everything. I figured she had enough on her plate without me to dump my problems on her. One evening I came home later than usual. Dad had an unexpected doctor's appointment, and I was stuck in traffic on the way back. When I finally walked through the door, I saw him sitting at the dining room table with a glass of wine and an open laptop in front of her. She didn't even look up. "Sorry I'm late," I said, dropping my bag by the door. "It's been a busy day." She nodded, still focused on her class. "Dinner's in the fridge." I opened the fridge and found a plate of leftovers neatly wrapped in plastic. I should have been grateful. After all, she was cooking. But instead I felt a strange mixture of guilt and disappointment. Guilt, because I knew she was probably tired of doing this every night, and disappointment, because I felt like I was entering someone else's house instead of my own. "Thanks," I said, warming up the food. I sat down across from her, hoping we could talk, but she didn't even look up from her screen. "Work stuff?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Yes," she replied in an even tone. And that was it. No follow-up, no, "How was your day?" Just a simple yes. I wanted to say something, to ask if everything was okay, but I didn't. Maybe I was afraid of the answer. Or maybe I was just too damn tired to deal with it. The thing was, I hadn't noticed much change in her. She'd always been someone who needed space, but now it seemed to me that she was actively avoiding me. She started getting out of the house more often, yoga class, hanging out with friends, sometimes dinner at work. I didn't pay attention to it at first. She was stressed, we both were. I figured she just needed to blow off steam. But the excuses started piling up. One night she told me she had a work dinner that ran late. I believed her until the next morning when I saw her phone on her desk with a message from her friend Sarah. "Last night was fun. We should do it again soon." I didn't say anything back. What was I supposed to say? That I was angry because she lied about where she was? That I could feel her slipping away from me, and I didn't know how to stop it? I convinced myself that there was nothing wrong with that. After all, Sarah was her friend. Maybe they were just having drinks after work. Nothing wrong. Nothing bad. But then there were other nights. Nights when she'd come home later and later, her makeup still fresh and her hair perfectly styled. She would tell me that she needed space, that she couldn't handle the chaos at home. I tried to understand. I was really trying. I knew this wasn't what she signed up for when we got married. We hadn't planned for my dad to move in with us or for our lives to revolve around doctor's appointments and medication schedules. But I thought we were a team. I thought that together we could handle anything. One Saturday, I tried to make things right. I took time off work and spent the morning getting everything in order, cleaning the house, arranging my dad's pills for the week, even made M's favorite dinner. I wanted to show her that I was still trying, that I cared. When she walked in the door that evening, I greeted her with a smile. "Hey, I made lasagna. Your favorite." She gave me a tired smile. "Thanks, but I already ate. I had a snack with Sarah after yoga." My heart dropped. Okay. I didn't say anything after that. What was the point of that? I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the faint sound of her typing on her laptop in the other room. I wanted to go to her, to ask her what was wrong, to fix what had happened between us. But I didn't. Instead, I told myself that it was just a phase, that things would get better. I should have known better. Looking back, I can see how the cracks in our marriage began to widen in those months. We weren't talking. We weren't communicating. She was growing more and more distant, and I was too busy being too damn stupid to notice how far she'd gone. At the time, I thought I was doing the best I could. I thought I was a good husband, a good son, a good man. But now I wonder if I wasn't fooling myself. Because the truth is, I didn't want to face the reality that my marriage was slipping out of my hands. And by the time I realized it, it was too late. I should have seen it coming. Hindsight is 20/20, right? At the time, I thought Em was just doing what she needed to do to handle the situation. After all, things were getting crazy around here. My dad needed constant care, and my job was requiring more hours than ever. All in all, chaos. I told myself it was only natural that she needed a break. At least that's what she was saying. "I just need some space, Nate. Some time to myself." And like an idiot, I believed her. It started out small. She would leave for an hour or two after work, saying she needed to clear her head or run some errands. It made sense at first. She juggled a lot, as did I. And frankly, I didn't mind taking on all the housework. I considered myself indebted to her. She helped with Daddy when I wasn't home. So if she needed a break, who was I to argue? But then the breaks started to drag on. One Thursday night, I came home after a hard day at work. I had spent the entire afternoon in meetings and then got stuck in traffic for an hour. By the time I walked in the door, I was already on my feet. I barely had time to take my shoes off before Dad called from his room. "Nate, can you give me a hand?" I sighed, setting my bag on the floor. "I'll be right there, Dad." After helping him take his medicine and tuck him in for the night, I looked around the house and realized Em wasn't home. No note, no message. Just an empty house and an unfinished sandwich on the table. I quickly texted her, "Hey, did you leave?" It was almost an hour before she responded. "Yeah, just grabbing a bite to eat with Sarah. I'll be home soon." Good, good. Sarah is her best friend. They've been close since college, and I know Sarah's going through a divorce, so maybe she needed someone to talk to. I let her. But soon, turned into almost midnight. By the time Em walked through the door, I was already lying in bed pretending to be asleep because I didn't want to start a conversation. This had become the new norm. She would leave for a little while, and come home hours later, always making excuses about being late at work or seeing Sarah. The thing is, I wanted to believe her. I really did. I didn't want to be that husband who accused his wife of lying every time she left the house. So I gave her the benefit of the doubt. But it wasn't just the late nights. Em had become distant in other ways as well. She stopped asking how my day was going. She stopped checking up on my dad unless I specifically asked her to. It seemed like everything she did was a mere formality, like she was doing her job. She would come home, drop her bag by the door, and retire to her bedroom or the couch with her phone. One night, I found her sitting in the dark in the living room flipping through Instagram. I sat down next to her, hoping to strike up a conversation, but she barely looked up. "Rough day?" I asked. "Uh-huh," she mumbled, still glued to the screen. I waited for her to start talking, but she wouldn't. Then I tried again. "Do you want to talk about it?" She finally looked up, her face blank. "Not really. I'm just tired." That was it. The end of the conversation. But the most frustrating part was that I didn't feel angry. I felt defeated, like I was losing her, and there was nothing I could do about it. I started noticing little things that didn't add up. She'd say she was doing yoga, but there were days when her mat and gym bag were still in the closet. Or she'd say she had a work dinner, but I'd overhear her laughing with someone on the phone when she thought I wasn't listening. One Friday night, she told me she was meeting Sarah for drinks. She even showed me a text from Sarah confirming their plans. But around 9:30, I got a call from my sister Allie. "Hi, just came by to see how you're doing," she said. "How's Daddy doing?" "Same as always," I replied. "Why?" "No reason," she said, her tone cautious. "I just thought I saw them at the Oak Room. I didn't know if you two were walking together." The Oak Room was a bar on the other side of town. Em said she was meeting Sarah at the Clover, which is closer to home. My stomach rumbled. "Are you sure it was her?" I asked. "Absolutely sure," Allie replied. "She was with some guy." I didn't want to stare, but they looked pretty friendly. I tried to brush it off. "Yeah, maybe she ran into someone from work." "Maybe," Allie said, though there was no conviction in her voice. When Em got home later that night, I didn't say anything. And I wanted to. I wanted to call out to her, to ask her why she was lying, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I just sat in silence and watched her take off her heeled shoes and pour herself a glass of wine as if nothing had happened. It was at that moment that I realized I was in over my head. I started tracking her absences, not in some creepy, obsessive way, but just to see if I was going crazy. I wrote down every time she left the house, where she said she was going, and when she returned. The pattern didn't reveal itself right away. Yoga class on Tuesdays? She'd leave for 3 hours, but the studio was only 20 minutes away. Drinks with Sarah on Thursdays? Sarah's texts never mentioned drinking, only occasionally reporting on her divorce. The worst part was that I didn't want to know the truth. I hoped there was some innocent explanation, some way to rationalize everything. But deep down, I knew it was for the best. The cracks in our marriage were no longer just cracks. They were chasms that grew wider by the day. And no matter how hard I tried to hold the situation together, I couldn't stop the breakdown. The truth was coming, whether I was ready for it or not. And I wasn't ready. It's crazy how life can flip you over in 1 second. One moment you're adrift, telling yourself everything is fine, convincing yourself that the cracks you see aren't really there. And then, out of the blue, something comes at you that you can't ignore, and suddenly the whole damn facade comes crashing down. For me, that moment came on a random Tuesday night thanks to my little sister Allie. Allie has always been witty. She's the kind of person who notices details that most people miss, which is why her growing up was a nightmare because she could pick up on any lie or half-truth I tried to slip our father. But she's also fiercely loyal. If Allie is in your corner, she will be with you to the end, no matter what. I sat in the living room that night, flipping through the TV channels and trying to ignore the growing pit in my stomach. Em had gone somewhere else again. "Another work dinner," she said. By this point, I'd given up asking for details. What's the point? I wouldn't know the truth anyway. The phone buzzed on the couch next to me, and I saw Allie's name on the screen. "Hey, what's up?" I answered, trying to sound normal. Her voice was unsure, hesitant. "Hi, are you busy?" "No, just hanging out." "Why?" She paused, and that's when I realized something was up. Allie doesn't hesitate unless she's about to drop a bomb. "I saw him tonight," she finally said. My stomach clenched. "What do you mean? Where?" "At the Oak Room," she said. "I was there with a couple friends and saw her with someone." The room suddenly became smaller, as if the walls had closed in. "What do you mean, with someone?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. She sighed. "It was a guy. I don't know who he was, but they were together at the bar. Laughing, talking honestly. It seemed pretty cozy. I felt like someone had punched me." Thoughts raced frantically through my head, trying to come up with an explanation, to make some kind of sense. "Are you sure it was her?" "Nate," Allie said, her voice firm, "I know what your wife looks like. It was her." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to defend him, to object that maybe Allie had misunderstood or jumped to conclusions. But the other part of me, the one that had been living with this gnawing doubt for months, now knew better. "Have you talked to her?" I asked. "No," Allie replied. "I didn't want to make a scene. I wasn't even sure if I should tell you, but I thought you might want to know." "Yes," I said, my voice hollow. "Thanks." After we hung up, I just sat there staring at the phone as if it held the answers to all my questions. My heart was pounding, my hands were shaking, and a million thoughts were going through my head at once. Who the hell was this guy? How long had this been going on? Was that why she was so distant? I wanted to call him right now and demand answers, but something was stopping me. Maybe it was fear. Fear of what she'd say, fear of confirming what I already suspected. Or maybe it was fatigue. I'd spent months holding things in, and now it felt like the dam had finally burst. Instead, I waited. When Em got home around 11, I was still sitting in the living room, pretending to watch TV. She walked in, took off her heeled shoes, and gave me a tired smile. "Hi," she said. "Sorry I'm late. Dinner took longer than I expected." I stared at her, trying to read her face to see any trace of guilt or remorse. But she looked calm, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. "How did it go?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Fine," she replied, heading for the kitchen. "Just a normal work conversation." I nodded, holding back the urge to call her out. Not right now. I needed time to think, to figure out how to approach this issue without going crazy. For the next few days, I kept my distance, both physically and emotionally. I went about my business, working, courting, making small talk with him, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Every time she left the house, I wondered where she was really going and who she was really with. I considered asking Allie for details, but I didn't want to drag her into the story any more than I already had. And honestly, what difference would it make? I didn't need proof. I needed to figure out what the hell I was going to do about it. The hardest part was acting normal around him. She didn't seem to notice that anything was wrong, and that only made me angrier. How could she be so calm, so unaffected, when I was falling apart? One night, after she went to bed, I sat in the kitchen with a beer and stared at my phone. I thought about confronting her in 100 different ways, but none of them felt right. If I jumped on her too aggressively, she'd shut down or deny everything. If I was too passive, she would brush me off or make excuses. In the end, I decided to start simple. I texted her, "Who were you with at the Oak Room the other night?" A minute later, I heard her phone buzzing in the bedroom. I waited, heart pounding, but she didn't answer. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. Before leaving for work, she kissed me on the cheek, her smile as bright as ever. It was as if she didn't notice that I had broken under the weight of all the things I had kept quiet about. It was then that I realized I couldn't keep pretending. The truth was out there, and it was only a matter of time before it came crashing down on us. I just wasn't sure if I was ready for what would follow next. Have you ever sat in a car on the road and just stared at the dashboard, trying to tune out what you know is going to be an unpleasant conversation? That's exactly what happened to me on Friday night. I parked in front of my house, my hands gripping the steering wheel as if that could somehow calm the storm in my head. I'd been mulling over what Allie had told me for days now, trying to figure out the right way to approach him. Every time I thought about it, her laughter sounded in my head, the laughter Allie had described in the Oak Room, the laughter she'd shared with him. It hurt me more than I wanted to admit. The thing was, I didn't want to explode. I didn't want to be the guy who lost his temper and turned a bad situation into a nuclear one. But how do you tell your wife about something like that without it getting out of hand? Finally, I got out of the car and walked into the house. The house was quiet except for the humming of the dishwasher. Em was sitting in the kitchen, sipping a glass of wine, and her phone was on the counter next to her. She looked up when I walked in and smiled like everything was normal. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked, casual as always. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I set my bag on the floor, leaned on the counter, and stared at her. "Who were you with at the Oak Room the other night?" I asked, getting straight to the point. Her smile froze, and for a split second I saw something flicker in her eyes. Surprise? Panic? Guilt? I couldn't tell, but it disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice calm but a little too controlled. "Allie saw you," I said. "She was there. She saw you with some guy." Em's face tensed. She set down her wine glass and crossed her arms, leaning her back against the counter. "You've got to be kidding me. Is that what we're doing now? Spying on each other?" "I wasn't spying," I said, though my voice rose. "She just happened to be there. And she saw you. So don't try to deny it." "I'm not denying anything," she replied, her tone defensive. "I was there. I was meeting with a coworker. Big deal. A coworker? I repeated, trying to keep my voice even. With who? Jason, she said, shrugging her shoulders like it was the most obvious thing in the world. We're working on the same projects. We were just having drinks after work. Just having drinks, I said slowly, letting the words hang in the air. At 10 o'clock at night? Laughing and looking cozy. According to Allie, her jaw clenched. Oh, so now your sister is spying and making up stories about me? You don't have to make up excuses for me, I snapped back. I'm asking you a simple question. Were you there with Jason? And were you laughing and looking cozy like she said you were? Em let out a harsh laugh and shook her head. That's crazy, Nate. I can't believe I'm being questioned because I went out for drinks with a coworker. Then why lie about it? I objected. You told me you were dating Sarah. Why not just say you were with Jason? She hesitated, just for a second. But it was enough. Because I knew you'd react this way, she finally said, throwing up her hands. You've been so paranoid lately, so worried about everything that's been going on. I didn't want to make it worse. Paranoid? I said, disbelief evident in my voice. I'm not paranoid, Em. I'm asking you to explain why my sister saw you at a bar with some guy, while you were lying to me about where you were. I didn't lie. She snapped back. I just didn't think it mattered. It wasn't a big deal, Nate. It was one drink, one conversation. That's all it was. Then why all the secrecy? I asked, my voice softer but no less demanding. Why didn't you tell me the truth? She groaned, rubbing her temples as if I was the one causing her headache. I don't know, okay? I was tired, and I didn't feel like answering your questions. I just wanted to relax a little and not feel guilty. And you decided that going on a date with some guy was the best way to do that? I asked, feeling a bitter taste in my mouth. She looked up at me. Jason is a friend. That's all he is. He listens when I need to vent and doesn't make me feel like I'm drowning in all this chaos. That's it. The word she used all the time, chaos. As if my father's illness, my long hours at work, and everything else we face are all because of me, all my fault. So you're saying it's my fault, I said quietly, looking at her. I didn't say that, she replied quickly, but her tone gave her away. You shouldn't have done it either, I said, shaking my head. It's pretty damn clear what you're implying, she sighed, running a hand through her hair. Nate, I'm not trying to blame you. I'm just tired. I feel like I'm suffocating here, and I need a break. That's all it's been. A breather. A breather, I repeated, and the words pierced me like a slap in the face. From what? From me? From this family? From your responsibilities? I didn't say that, she snapped, her frustration boiling over. God, why do you always twist everything I say? You act like I cheated on you or something, and I didn't. I just needed someone to talk to, someone who wouldn't be dragged into this whole mess. I stared at her, everything tight in my chest, my thoughts racing. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe it was really just a drink, just a conversation, just an outlet. But her defensive tone, the way she avoided looking me in the eye, it all didn't add up. Do you even hear yourself? I asked finally, my voice low and steady. You're making excuses for lying to your husband to spend time with another man. And you don't see that's a problem? I didn't lie. She shouted, her face reddening. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd make a big deal out of it, and apparently I was right. I shook my head, clenching my hands into fists at my sides. This isn't about me making a big deal out of it, Em. This is about trust. And right now, I don't know if I can trust you. Her face lowered for a moment, long enough for me to see the cracks in her armor. But then she straightened, jaw clenched, eyes blazing. Well, maybe you should find out, she said coldly. Because I can't keep going on like this. I can't keep walking on eggshells worrying about how you're going to react to every single thing I do. With those words, she grabbed her wine glass and ran out of the kitchen, leaving me standing still, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. I wanted to chase after her, to keep the conversation going, to make her see how much her words and actions were tearing me apart. But I didn't. Instead, I stood in silence, staring at the empty room and wondering if our marriage had reached the point of no return. I don't think there is a manual on what to do when you suspect your wife is cheating on you. There is no manual that tells you how to deal with the onslaught of doubt, anger, and heartbreaking sadness. And yet here I was, in the middle of it all, and I felt like a fool trying to piece it all together. After that confrontation in the kitchen, things between Em and me had gotten worse. She'd become colder, more distant, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was drifting further away from me every day. The way she looked at her phone while texting with a faint smile on her face, the way she disappeared into another room to get some privacy during calls, all painted a picture I didn't want to see. I couldn't focus on anything else. Not on work, not on my dad, not even on normal conversations. All my thoughts were consumed by this gnawing question. Is she cheating? I told myself I wouldn't peek. I'd always considered myself a person who respected boundaries, even when relationships got complicated. But the trust between us had already been broken, and I couldn't continue to live in ignorance. So one night when Em was in the shower, I gave in. Her phone was on the nightstand, a new message popping up on the screen. My hands trembled when I picked it up, my heart pounding so loudly I thought she might hear it over the sound of the water. I told myself I would just look for confirmation, something that would either dispel my doubts or confirm what I already suspected. The first message I saw hit me like the impact of a truck. It was from Jason, the coworker she'd mentioned during our argument. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. It was like the ground went out from under my feet. My stomach rumbled as I scrolled through their conversation, each message worse than the last. They weren't just flirty or suggestive, they were blatant, intimate ones that made my chest ache. I love the way you laugh when it's just the two of us. I wish I could see you every night. Being apart from you is torture. And then the one that broke me completely. I'm counting down the days until we can finally be together. I don't know how long I stood there staring at the screen, my hands shaking as I scrolled through message after message. It wasn't just physical, but emotional as well. She wasn't just cheating on me, she was falling in love with him. When the shower turned off, I panicked. I blocked her phone and put it back on the nightstand, then hurried into the living room, my head spinning. Her laughter from the correspondence still echoed in my ears, mingling with her smile in the oak room. I was sitting on the couch, staring stupidly at the wall, when she came out of the bedroom in her pajamas, her hair wrapped in a towel. "Hi," she said casually, like everything was fine. "Hi," I mumbled, trying to sound normal even though I knew I was failing. She sat down next to me, scrolling through her phone like she hadn't just blown up my whole world. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I sat in silence, my heart clenching harder and harder in my chest with each passing second. The next few days passed like a blur. I went to work, took care of my father, and tried to act normal, but my thoughts were preoccupied with something else entirely. I couldn't stop replaying the messages in my head, wondering how long it had been going on and how I had gotten so overwhelmed. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the lies, the way she'd looked me in the eye and told me I was paranoid while she herself was secretly dating Jason. Every moment we'd shared over the past few months seemed like a lie, a game to cover up what she was really doing. One night as I was helping my father into bed, he looked at me, frowning. "Are you doing okay, son?" he asked. I gave a forced smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't insist on his own. After tucking him in, I went back to the living room and sat there in the dark, my thoughts racing. I couldn't hold back any longer. It was eating me alive. I called Allie, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. "Hey, Nate," she answered. "What's wrong?" "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice hoarse. "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone immediately becoming concerned. "It's Em," I said. "Yeah, I found messages. Between her and Jason. She's cheating on me, Allie." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when she finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "I'm so sorry, Nate. I'd like to say I'm surprised, but after what I saw in the oak room, I have a premonition. I don't know what to do," I admitted, and my voice trailed off. "I feel like an idiot, like I should have seen this coming." "You're not an idiot," Allie said firmly. "You trusted her, and she took advantage of that. It's not your fault, Nate. I wanted to believe her, but guilt was already creeping into my soul. Had I really pushed him away because of everything that was going on? Had I been so focused on my dad and work that I hadn't noticed her slipping away? You have to face her, Allie said, bringing me out of my reverie. You can't just sit still, Nate. She has to know that you know. I know, I said, though the thought of having to face him again made my stomach rumble. I don't even know where to start. Start with honesty, Allie said. And remember, no matter what happens, you're not alone. I've got your back, okay? Thanks, Allie, I said, my voice thick with emotion. After we hung up, I sat looking at the messages on my phone for a long while longer. I knew Allie was right. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. But just the thought of having to confront him, of her trying to justify what she'd done, made me uncomfortable. Still, I realized I couldn't avoid it forever. The truth had been revealed, and now there was no turning back. I just had to find the strength to face it. There comes a point in every fight when you realize you've crossed the line, and there's no turning back. I realized it as soon as M's face contorted with frustration and anger. The quiet defense she'd clung to during our previous arguments was now gone. This wasn't just a fight. This was payback. It had started like so many of our conversations lately. Tense, strained, but maintaining a facade of politeness. All day I'd been going over those messages from Jason in my head, trying to figure out what to say to her, how to approach the subject without going crazy. By the time I got home, I felt like a shaken soda can about to explode. When I walked in, Em was in the kitchen, sipping another glass of wine like she didn't give a damn about anything. She glanced at me as I set my bag by the door. You got home late, she said nonchalantly, as if we were still living in some parallel universe where everything was fine. Yeah, I replied, my voice strained. I had a lot on my mind. She raised an eyebrow, but didn't insist, instead returning to her wine. The gesture, the complete lack of interest, lit a fire in me that I could no longer ignore. Are you going to tell me the truth, Em? I asked, getting right to the point. She frowned and looked at me. What are you talking about now? About you and Jason, I said, and my voice sounded sharper than I intended. How long has this been going on? She froze for a second, her eyes narrowing as she realized there was no way out of this situation. But instead of outright denying it like I expected, she just sighed and shook her head. I already told you, Nate, she said with irritation in her voice. We're just friends. I don't know why you're so obsessed with this. Friends? I repeated, laughing bitterly. Is that what friends do now? Send each other messages like, last night was amazing, and I can't stop thinking about you? Her face flushed, whether from anger or guilt, I couldn't tell. You went through my phone? Don't try to take it out on me, I snapped back. I'm not the one sneaking around and lying about where I've been. I'm not the one sending messages like that to someone who isn't my spouse. You had no right to invade my privacy, she replied, raising her voice. And you had no right to betray me, shouted I, and those words echoed through the kitchen. Then she snapped back. You want to talk about betrayal? She said, her voice cold and hard. How about the fact that you've completely given up on this marriage, Nate? How about the fact that you've become so immersed in your father and your work that I've ceased to exist for you? Her words hit me like a slap in the face. What the hell are you talking about? I asked, my anger replaced by confusion. You don't get it, do you? She said, her eyes blazing. I've been so lonely, Nate. For months, even years, I felt like nothing more than a background character in your life. You don't notice me, you don't care about me. All you care about is your father and your job. I stared at her, stunned. Are you seriously accusing me of this? I'm not accusing you, she said, though her tone said otherwise. I'm just trying to let you know how I feel. Do you have any idea what it's like to live with someone who doesn't notice you anymore? To feel that no matter how much you give, it will never be enough? I opened my mouth to object, but she interrupted me. I've tried, Nate, she said, her voice cracking. I held it in for so long, hoping you'd see me, hoping you'd care. But you didn't care. You just kept putting everything and everyone above me. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to yell at her, to tell her she was wrong, that I was doing everything I could to keep us afloat. But deep down, some part of me doubted she was right. I thought about all the nights I'd come home too tired to talk, all the weekends I'd spent at the hospital with my dad instead of her. I thought about the dinners she ate alone, the conversations we never had. Do you have any idea how lonely I was? She continued, her voice softer but no less harsh. Jason wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't plan it, Nate. But he made me feel something I haven't felt in a long time, that I matter. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So what? I asked bitterly. Are you saying it's my fault? That I pushed you into cheating? She flinched at the word cheating, but didn't deny it. I'm saying that things have been falling apart between us for a long time, she said quietly. And maybe we both had something to do with it. Her words pierced Jason deeper than any of his messages. It was one thing to suspect her of cheating, another to see the proof on her phone, but to hear her say it, to hear her admit that she turned to someone else because I wasn't enough, it broke something in me that I hadn't even realized was there. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to fight for our marriage, to beg her to end her relationship with Jason and try to fix what had gone wrong between us. But the other part of me, the part that was hurt and angry and tired, doubted whether anything could be salvaged at all. You had a choice, I finally said, and my voice went hollow. You could have talked to me. You could have told me how you felt. But instead you chose to betray me. That's on you, not me. She didn't say anything back, her eyes glittering as she stared at the floor. For a long time we just stood in silence, the weight of everything said hanging in the air. I wanted to believe that this was just another fight, that we could get through it if we tried hard enough. But deep down, I knew it was for the best. This wasn't just a crack in our marriage, it was a fracture. And as much as we both wanted it to be, I wasn't sure it could be fixed. Finally I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there alone. It felt like the beginning of the end. After the fight, I felt like I was in a fog. Everything was muted. The sounds, the sights, even my own emotions. I was angry, sure, but it wasn't the kind of fiery anger that makes you slam doors or punch walls. It was a slow-burning anger that leaves you devastated and exhausted. The work was barely manageable. My concentration was broken, and I would catch myself staring at the computer screen for minutes on end, rereading the same email and not absorbing a single word. Things were even worse at home. Em and I barely spoke. She would seclude herself in the bedroom or on the couch flipping through her phone, and I would stay in the guest room with my dad or in the garage, pretending to fix things that didn't need fixing. I didn't even know what I should do. Should I try to save my marriage? Should I confront Jason? Should I pack my bags and leave? Every time I tried to think about what I should do, my thoughts became a mess of options and guesswork. And then Allie stepped in. She called me one night, just after I'd put my father to bed. I barely had time to say hello to her before she started showing her usual big sister energy, even though she's technically the younger one. Nate, you can't keep this up, she said. It's not healthy. You need to talk to someone. I'm already talking to you, I said, trying to brush her off. Yeah, but you're not saying anything, she replied. You're just repeating motions, and it's not helping. She wasn't wrong. I tried to handle everything on my own. My marriage, my father, my job, because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. But I could barely stand on my own 2 feet. The next evening Allie came in with a 6-pack of beer and her usual can-do attitude. She sat me down at the kitchen table and made me talk. I told her everything. About the messages, about the lies, about the fight with him, about how Em accused me of neglecting her, of putting everything else above our marriage, about the guilt I felt, even though I didn't think I'd done anything wrong. I don't even know who I'm more angry at, I admitted. At her, at Jason, at myself, all of the above. Allie listened, nodding thoughtfully and sipping her beer. When I finally stopped rambling, she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, she said. Em messed it up. Very badly. But that doesn't mean you're wrong to feel conflicted. She's not just some random person who hurt you. She's your wife. It's complicated. That word, complicated, sounded like an understatement. There was nothing black and white about this situation. I hated what she did, but I still loved her. I hated the lies, but I couldn't ignore the part of me that wondered if I'd pushed her away. I just feel stuck, I finally said. Like no matter what I do, I'm going to lose something. My marriage, my self-respect, my sanity. Then take your time, Allie said. Take your time. Figure out what you want before you make any serious decisions. In the meantime, lean on people who care about you. You don't have to do this alone. Easier said than done, but I knew she was right. The next day, I called my buddy Mark. We've been friends since high school, and he's one of the few people I can talk to without feeling like I need to put on a manly appearance. We met at a local diner, the kind of place that has shabby booths and waitresses who call you, honey. Mark showed up in his usual casual manner. Jeans and a hoodie, baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Man, you look damn good, he said as I slid into the booth. Thanks, I replied dryly. It's good to see you too. After we ordered, I told him everything. He listened in silence, his expression unreadable, which was a little unnerving. Mark wasn't the type to sugarcoat events, but he wasn't the type to let his friends wallow in self-pity either. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. Look, he said, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know what you're going through, because I don't. But if there's one thing I've learned from my own mistakes, it's that you can't control other people's actions. You can only control your reaction to them. I nodded, but didn't say anything. So, what do you want to do? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to walk away and never look back. But another part of me, I blushed, not knowing how to finish the sentence. The other part of you wants to make things right, he said, finishing the sentence for me. Yeah. Mark nodded slowly. Here's the thing. You have to figure out what you can live with. If you think you can get over it, then fight for it. But if you can't trust her again, no matter how much you love her, then it's not worth the pain. His words were memorable to me long after I left the diner. They echoed in my head as I drove home, as I sat in the garage looking at the tools I pretended to put in order, as I lay in bed listening to M's breathing coming from the other side of the house. I didn't have all the answers yet. Hell, I didn't even have most of them. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. Allie and Mark reminded me of something I'd forgotten in all the chaos. I wasn't just a husband, or a son, or a guy who'd been cheated on. I was a person, and there were people around me who cared about me, who wanted to help me figure things out. It didn't solve all the problems, but it was a start, and it was enough for the moment. If you've ever lived with someone after a broken relationship, you know what I'm talking about when I say that home no longer felt like home. It was a battlefield, but not one where there was yelling or slamming doors. No, it was quieter, colder, a tense silence that settled over everything, stretching every second until it was unbearable. After it was all cleared up, M and I moved around each other like strangers. Actually, that's unfair. Strangers would have been more polite. We avoided eye contact, spoke in curt phrases, and kept to different corners of the house. I spent most of my time in the guest room with my dad or in the garage, and M took refuge in the bedroom, living room, or wherever I wasn't. I always thought of the house as ours. We'd picked it out together, painted the walls together, argued about furniture together. But now it felt like a prison to me. Every room held memories of better times, of laughter, of love, and each one was like a punch in the gut. I couldn't walk into the kitchen and not see her standing at the stove with her hair pulled back and humming some random song while she made dinner. I couldn't sit on the couch and not imagine the evenings we'd spent watching movies with her legs tucked under me. But the memories weren't comforting anymore. They reminded me of what I'd lost, of how far we'd fallen. The nights were the hardest. I lay in bed alone, staring up at the ceiling, knowing she was just around the corner. Sometimes I could hear her moving around, the quiet creak of the floorboards, the sound of her opening a closet or turning on the TV. It drove me crazy. I wanted to burst into the hallway, to demand answers, to make her tell me why she'd done this to us. But I never did. I didn't know what scared me more, the thought of hearing her excuses again, or the thought that she might not have any. My father must have picked up on this tension, though he didn't say anything directly. He looked at me with a long, searching gaze, as if trying to figure out what was wrong and at the same time not to interfere. I could tell it was weighing on him, that he was stuck in the middle of it all. He tried to make small talk at dinner, asking about work or the weather, but our silence with M always drowned out his attempts. One evening, as I was helping him into bed, he put his hand on my shoulder and looked at me with that even, impassive expression that was always on his face. "You've got a lot to do, son," he said quietly, "but don't let it eat you alive." I nodded, not believing I could speak. The truth was that it felt like I was drowning. Every day I woke up with a heaviness in my chest, a constant pain that I couldn't get rid of no matter how hard I tried. I couldn't stop thinking about the betrayal, the lies, the life we had built together, and how easily she had given it up. But at the same time, I couldn't forget the love I still felt for her. That was the hardest thing to reconcile with. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to pack up her things, throw them on the front lawn, and tell her to get out of my life. But I couldn't. Every time I looked at her, I saw glimpses of the woman I had fallen in love with, the woman who laughed at my stupid jokes, who danced with me in the kitchen, who held my hand in the hospital waiting room when my father had his first heart attack. It was like there were two versions of her, the one I loved and the one who betrayed me, and I didn't know which one was real anymore. She wasn't getting any better. Some days she walked around looking so defiant, as if she dared to say something to me. Other days she looked at me with this heartbreaking mixture of guilt and sadness, like she wanted to apologize but didn't know how. It was exhausting trying to figure out what version of her I would get. Sometimes I'd catch her gaze, her eyes studying my face as if she was trying to assess how much damage she'd done. But when I averted my gaze, she looked away, retreating into her shell. The few conversations we had were about logistics, bills, groceries, my father's doctor's appointments. They were short, emotionless conversations, as if we were co-workers stuck on a single project we didn't care about. One evening I found myself sitting in the garage looking at a pile of tools on my workbench. I hadn't touched them in weeks, but I was still spending more and more time there. It was the only place in the house that wasn't tainted with memories of us. I thought about calling Allie or Mark to spill out everything I was feeling to someone who could understand me, but I didn't. It wasn't that I didn't trust them. I did. It was just that I didn't know how to put it into words. How to explain that you're stuck in this vicious cycle, too hurt to stay but too scared to leave. The truth was that I didn't know what I wanted. Part of me still held out hope that we could fix things, that the woman I fell in love with was still out there somewhere. But another part of me realized that even if she was, things would never be the same again. Trust was gone, and without it, who are we? I thought about what Mark had said, about figuring out what I could live with. But every time I tried to envision my future, all I saw was a blank slate. I didn't know what to do next, but I realized I couldn't stay in this place forever. The silence, the tension, the constant reminders of what we had lost. It was suffocating. Something had to change. One way or another, this impasse had to end. I just wasn't sure if I was ready for what followed next. Things didn't happen all at once. The decision to end my marriage wasn't some epiphany or event that pushed me over the edge. It was a slow, grinding process, a million little realizations that accumulated until their weight was impossible to ignore. I lived in that house for weeks, feeling like an outsider in my own life. The silence between M and me became its own entity, a constant presence that followed me from room to room. Every glance, every half-hearted attempt at conversation was a reminder that everything was broken. I wanted to believe that we could fix it. God knows I tried. I revisited every argument, every conversation, every mistake I made, trying to figure out where we went wrong. But no matter how much I twisted myself into knots, I couldn't escape the truth. M had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. It wasn't just about her cheating, though it was about that too. It was about the trust she'd broken, the lies she'd told, and the way she'd looked me in the eye and tried to make me feel like it was my fault. I couldn't help but see those messages. I couldn't help but hear her excuses, and I couldn't keep pretending that the woman I loved was still the same woman standing across from me right now. The hardest part was letting go of the life I thought we would have together. When I married him, I envisioned us growing old side by side, raising a family, supporting each other through the ups and downs. I never imagined it would end up like this, us avoiding each other in the house we once called our own. One evening, as I sat in the garage looking over the divorce papers Allie had helped me get, I felt a strange mix of emotions: grief, anger, relief, and something akin to hope. It wasn't hope that things would work out between us, that ship had sailed. It was hope that maybe I could be on the other side of all this again. I thought about my father, sleeping in the guest room, and how much he had sacrificed for Allie and me growing up. He didn't have the luxury of falling apart after Mom died. He didn't have the opportunity to wallow in self-pity or run away from his responsibilities. He just kept moving forward, day by day, because that's what we needed. I wanted to be that kind of person. The kind of person who goes head over heels in solving problems, even when it hurts like hell. The kind of person my father would be proud of, even if I wasn't yet proud of myself. So, the next morning, I applied. It wasn't as dramatic as I'd imagined. No major confrontation, no tearful goodbyes. Just a trip to the courthouse, a few signatures, and a quiet ride home. When I walked in the door, Em was sitting at the kitchen table, holding a cell phone in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. When she saw me, she looked up, her expression wary. "All done," I said simply, placing the papers on the table in front of her. She stared at them for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she nodded, in a small, almost imperceptible movement, and turned away. Neither of us said anything after that. And what was there to say? The decision had been made, and there was no point in delaying it any longer. I spent the next few weeks focused on taking care of my father and restoring some semblance of normalcy to my life. I leaned on Allie more than I ever had before, and she was a pillar through it all, reminding me that I wasn't alone, even when it felt like I was. I started going to therapy, something I never thought I would do, but it turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made. Talking to someone who wasn't emotionally involved in my life gave me a perspective I couldn't find on my own. I realized that I had a lot of guilt in me, not just for him, but for everything else. For failing to fix my marriage, for not being there for my dad the way I wanted to be, for not living up to the expectations I had set for myself. But guilt isn't productive. It doesn't solve anything. All it does is burden you and keep you stuck in the past. The more I let go of that guilt, the more I started to feel like myself again. I started exercising, something I hadn't done in years. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with. I even took up woodworking, a hobby I'd always been interested in but never had time for. Em moved into the house shortly after the paperwork was finalized. It was strange watching her pack up her things and walk out the door for the last time. I didn't feel angry or sad. I just felt tired. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to notice small changes. The house became brighter. The tension that hung over it disappeared. My conversations with my father became more genuine, more centered. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I'm not going to sit here and pretend everything is perfect. It's not. Divorce is messy business, and the scars it leaves don't heal overnight. But I'm learning to live with those scars, taking them as reminders of where I've been and how far I've come. Some days are still hard. I hear a song we once listened to, or I come across an old photo, and it hits me again. But now those moments happen less and less often, and when they do happen, they no longer knock me down like they used to. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm finally starting to believe that it might be something good. And that's enough for today. It's been a little over a year since Emma and I finalized our divorce. Some days it feels like a lifetime has passed. Other days it feels like it just happened. The weight of it all, the betrayal, the fighting, the nights spent staring at the ceiling and thinking about how it all fell apart is still there, but it doesn't weigh on me the way it used to. It's more of a dull ache now, a reminder of what I've been through and how far I've come. If you had told me then that I would be sitting here writing this today with a clear head and a calm heart, I wouldn't have believed you. Back then, I couldn't see beyond the pain. I couldn't imagine a life that didn't revolve around the wreckage of my marriage. But life makes you move on, whether you're ready for it or not. The house is quieter now, but it's a good quiet. It moved out last year, and I stayed here with my dad. At first, the silence was unbearable, a constant reminder that everything was gone. But over time, it became something different, peaceful, even. Without the tension, without the feeling of walking on eggshells, the house began to feel like home again. Dad's health is stable, which is more than I could have hoped for. Caring for him is still a challenge, but I have come to appreciate it. He has always been my rock, and now it's my turn to be his rock. Sometimes we sit on the porch together and chat about nothing. He tells me stories from his youth, stories I've probably heard 100 times before, but I don't mind. These moments are a gift, and I no longer take them for granted. As for me, I'm still figuring things out. I've gone head over heels in my work, but not to escape, but to recover. It brings a satisfaction that wasn't there before, as if every task completed, every goal achieved, is a small step towards getting my life back. I'm also working on myself, mentally, physically, emotionally. Therapy was a turning point, even though I didn't want to start. Talking to someone who doesn't know me or care about my life has helped me see things more clearly. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is that healing is never linear. Some days I feel on top of the world, ready to tackle anything. Other days, something minor, a song on the radio, a random memory, knocks me off track. And that's okay. I've stopped expecting perfection from myself. I reconnected with old friends I lost touch with during the chaos of my marriage. It was awkward at first, like I didn't know how to fit into their lives. But they welcomed me with open arms, and I realized how much I missed those connections. I even joined a local woodworking group that I've been interested in for years, but never had the time or energy for. Turns out making things with your hands is one of the most therapeutic things you can do. Every now and then I hear about M from mutual friends or social media. She still works at the same place, still socializes with the same people. I no longer feel angry when I think about her. I feel sad, for both of us. We once had something real, something worth fighting for, and we let it slip away. But I've accepted that some things don't last. I don't know if she stayed with Jason, and frankly, I don't care. That part of my life is over, and I've made peace with that. What matters now is what comes next. For the first time in a long time, I'm excited about the future. I haven't figured it all out yet, and I'm not getting my hopes up. But I've realized that it's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to take things one day at a time, to focus on the small victories instead of obsessing over the big picture. I also learned a lot about myself. I learned that I am stronger than I thought I was, that I can survive things I didn't even realize I could. I learned that self-esteem is not about being perfect, but about standing up for yourself, even when it's hard. Most importantly, I learned that it's okay to let go. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting or pretending it never happened. It means accepting that the past is the past and that it doesn't have to define you. Right now, I'm focused on myself, on my family, on building a life that allows me to be proud of myself. And that is enough. So to everyone who is reading this and going through something similar, hang in there. It's going to hurt. It will feel impossible at times, but you will get through it. You will find your way, even if it's not the way you envisioned it. And when you do, you will realize something important. You are stronger than you think.